Dad, what are you doing here? Look at the way you're dressed. I haven't eaten since yesterday, Stanley. Take this money and leave.
Dad, why do you keep showing up like this? I thought family was supposed to help each other. Not here, not in front of my clients. Go somewhere.
Papa, what happened? Have you eaten today?
No, my daughter. But don't worry about me.
How can I not worry? Come, let's get you some food.
Chief Martins did not become wealthy by being a soft man. He became wealthy by being the kind of man who woke up at 4 a.m. when the rest of Lagos was still dreaming, who shook hands with politicians and signed contracts before other men had finished their morning tea, who built a business empire from a single shop in Surulere into a real estate conglomerate that spanned 3 states. He was the kind of man people whispered about with admiration in public and fear in private. He wore his agbada like a second skin. His shoes were always polished. His voice, deep and unhurried, filled every room he entered before he even opened his mouth. At 63 years old, Chief Martins was the definition of what Nigerians called a man of substance. But something had been disturbing his sleep. It started small, little things, the kind of things a man notices but tells himself he is imagining, like how his first son, Stanley, only called on Fridays, always mysteriously right before the weekend, or how his second son, Derek, suddenly became very interested in investment discussions every time there was a business deal on the table, or how both of them stopped visiting the house in Ikoyi unless there was something to gain. His daughter was a different kind of problem entirely. Favor, the last born, the stubborn one. 2 years ago, Chief Martins had disowned her. He had said the words out loud in front of the entire family with the coldness of a man signing a termination letter. You are no longer my daughter. She had wanted to marry a man he considered beneath their family, a school teacher from Delta State, with no connections, no land, no title. Chief Martins had given her an ultimatum. She had chosen love over his approval. He had not spoken to her since. But lately, at night, when the house was quiet and the generator hummed its low evening song, Chief Martins would lie on his back in his expensive bed and think about his children, not with pride, with a quiet, creeping worry that settled in his chest like a stone. Do they love me, or do they love my money? It was his late wife, Mama Favor, who had first planted that question in his heart. She had told him once, years before the sickness took her, that he was raising children who feared him instead of loved him. He dismissed her. He was providing for them, he said. What more did children need? Now she was gone, and he was surrounded by sons who called on Fridays and visited only when it was profitable. The thought made him sit up in bed one Tuesday night, his heart beating with a strange, restless energy. I want to know the truth. He had built his career on studying people, on reading rooms, on testing partners before signing deals, on never trusting what was shown on the surface. Why had he never applied that same discipline to his own household? He made a decision that night. He would test them. Not with lawyers, not with a will, not with a family meeting where everyone behaved perfectly because the stakes were visible. He would test them the way life actually tests people, when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain, when the person in front of you has nothing to offer except their need. He would become invisible. He would go out into the streets of Lagos dressed as what he feared most, a nobody, a beggar, a man with empty pockets and worn slippers and a look in his eyes that said, I have nothing. And he would walk past his children's lives and see who they truly were. He called no one. He told no one. He went to the back of his compound where all things were stored and found a torn wrapper, a faded Ankara shirt with missing buttons, and a pair of rubber slippers that saw better days in 1998. He rubbed dust on his hands. He removed his gold watch. He covered his face with a worn cap. Chief Martins, the man who owned property in 3 states, looked in the cracked mirror of the storeroom and saw a stranger staring back. He nodded. Now we will see who my children really are.
Stanley had a reputation to protect, and a father who was suddenly in the way of it. Stanley Martins was 38 years old, married to a woman named Cynthia, who believed that social media was a personality, and father to 2 children he mostly saw on weekends when his schedule permitted. He drove a black Lexus LX 570. He wore designer watches. His Instagram bio said real estate, lifestyle, legacy, and he had 14,000 followers who believed every word of it. He lived in an estate in Lekki Phase 1, a place where the roads were smooth and the neighbors minded their business, unless there was a naming ceremony or a funeral to attend. Stanley had worked hard to get there. Or rather, Stanley had worked hard to appear to have worked hard to get there. The truth, which he kept folded neatly out of sight, like an old receipt, was that most of what he had came from Chief Martins. The startup capital, the land, the connections, the name. The Martins name opened doors. Stanley walked through them and pretended he had built them himself. On the morning of the test, Stanley was driving from a meeting in Victoria Island toward Lekki when traffic stopped him near a bus stop on Ozumbamba-Diwe. It was a kind of Lagos traffic that gave a man time to think, or in Stanley's case, time to scroll through his phone and check how many likes his last post had received. That was when he saw the old man, sitting on a concrete block near the roadside, slightly bent, wearing a faded Ankara shirt and rubber slippers, a worn cap on his head, hands resting on his knees, the posture of a man who had nowhere to be and nothing waiting for him. Something stirred in Stanley's chest. He looked closer. Something about the man's jawline, the way his shoulders sat, the particular way he tilted his head slightly to the left. Stanley's phone nearly slipped from his hand. No, that cannot be. He stared hard. The man did not look up. Stanley's mind raced through the logic. Chief Martins does not sit on roadsides. Chief Martins does not wear torn Ankara shirts. Chief Martins is probably at the office right now, in his air-conditioned office on the island. He convinced himself he was wrong, that it was just a resemblance. Lagos was full of old men. They all started to look the same after a while. But then the old man coughed, a particular low cough, almost like a grunt, and Stanley's stomach dropped. He knew that cough. He had grown up listening to that cough every morning, echoing from his father's bedroom through the hallway of the family house. It was his father. For a full 30 seconds, Stanley sat in his car with the air conditioning blowing cold against his face, frozen. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Cynthia. Don't forget, we have the Adeye's dinner tonight. Get home by 7. Don't come smelling like road. Stanley looked at the message. He looked at the old man on the concrete block. He looked at the message again. He thought about the Adeye's dinner. He thought about Cynthia's face if he arrived late or distracted. He thought about what it would look like, him, Stanley Martins of Lekki Phase 1, getting out of his car on a busy road to talk to a man sitting in the dust, even if it was his father. Especially if it was his father. What if someone sees? What if someone takes a photo? What does it say about my family? He wound up his window. He pressed his foot on the accelerator as the traffic began to move. He told himself he wasn't certain it was his father. He told himself there was no reason to make a scene. He told himself he would call later, maybe. He told himself many things, one after another, the way a man builds a wall brick by brick, each lie supporting the next. As his Lexus moved forward, he caught one final glimpse of the old man in his side mirror. The old man was watching the car drive away. Stanley turned up the volume on his car radio and did not look back. If this story is already hitting you somewhere deep, you are not alone. Stories like this remind us of what truly matters. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss a story.
Derek Martins gave money like some men give apologies, quickly, without feeling, just to make the discomfort stop. He was 34, the middle child, the one Chief Martins had always called the smart one. Where Stanley was loud and image-conscious, Derek was calculated and quiet. He had studied business at a university in Abuja, come back to Lagos with a sharp mind and sharper ambition, and inserted himself into his father's companies like a key finding its lock. He was good at reading situations, good at knowing what people wanted and giving them just enough of it to keep them close. His colleagues at work called him efficient. His wife, Enena, called him emotionally unavailable on the nights when the children were asleep and she wanted something real from him. Derek called himself practical. He was driving his grey Camry through Surulere that afternoon, coming from a property inspection when he spotted the old man. Unlike Stanley, Derek did not need 30 seconds to recognize his father. He knew immediately. The moment his eyes landed on the figure sitting by the roadside pepper store, something cold and electric ran through him. He slowed his car. He parked poorly, one tire on the curb, and sat very still. His mind, ever the machine, began to calculate. He is testing us. This is a test. Derek had always suspected his father was capable of something like this. Chief Martins was not a sentimental man. He was a strategic one. And strategy sometimes dressed itself as vulnerability to expose the truth in others. So Derek made his own calculation. He could walk away like he suspected Stanley had already done, but that felt too risky. If this was a test, total rejection would be the wrong score. He needed to pass, but pass in a way that cost him nothing too significant. He got out of his car. He walked over to where the old man sat, staying close to the store so that the crowd of afternoon buyers formed a kind of privacy around them. He crouched a little, looking at his father from under the brim of his cap. Chief Martins looked up at him with eyes that gave nothing away. Derek reached into his pocket and brought out a 500 naira note. He held it out. "Here," he said. His voice was low, controlled. Chief Martins said nothing. He looked at the money, then at his son. Derek pressed the note into the old man's hand and straightened up. Then he leant down one more time, close enough that only the old man could hear him, and said something that no son should ever say to his father. "Don't come near me in public again. I don't know you. If you are hungry, find a church." He said it calmly, without hatred, without drama. The way a man tells a junior employee they are being let go. Efficient, clean, nothing personal. Then he walked back to his car, straightened his collar in the reflection of the window, and drove away. Behind him, Chief Martins sat with a 500 naira note in his palm and his son's words still hanging in the hot afternoon air like smoke. "Don't come near me in public again. I don't know you." The old man closed his fist around the note. His jaw tightened. He had been a hard man all his life. He had not cried at his wife's funeral because he believed strong men grieved in silence. He had not cried when he said the words, "You are no longer my daughter," to Favor, even though something inside him had cracked that night. But sitting there in the dust, invisible in his torn Ankara and rubber slippers, holding a 500 naira note from his son who wanted him to disappear, Chief Martins felt something wet and shameful gather behind his eyes. He blinked it away. He had one more child to find. She was supposed to be broken. She was supposed to be suffering. That was the ending he had written for her, and she had refused to leave it. Favor was 29 years old. She lived in a rented flat in Yaba with her husband, Jason, the school teacher from Delta State, who Chief Martins had declared was not good enough. They had a daughter, 18 months old, with her mother's eyes and her father's calm. Her name was Grace. Favor ran a small catering business out of her kitchen. She had started it 2 years ago, the same week her father disowned her, when she had sat on the floor of their empty new apartment, no furniture yet, no cushion under her, and decided that bitterness was a luxury she could not afford. She was not rich, she was not comfortable in the way her brothers were comfortable, but she was building something real, something that was hers, brick by careful brick. She had not spoken to her father in 2 years. She thought of him sometimes, not with anger, but with the quiet, aching sadness of someone who has accepted a loss they never wanted. She thought of her mother, long dead. She thought about what her mother would say. She thought about Grace and about what kind of woman she wanted her daughter to watch her become. She had chosen. She chose not to become the thing that had been done to her. That Thursday afternoon, Favor was returning from buying supplies in Tejuosho Market, a nylon bag of tomatoes in one hand and her phone in the other, her small van parked 2 streets away because Tejuosho traffic had no mercy. She was tired, her feet hot. Grace had been up twice the previous night, and she had a large order to fulfill by Friday morning. She turned a corner, and she stopped. Sitting outside a roadside buka, hunched on a bench, wearing a faded Ankara shirt and rubber slippers that did not fit properly, was her father. For a moment, the street sounds disappeared. The bus conductors shouting, the hawkers, the generator noise from the provision store across the road, all of it faded. She could not explain how she knew. His face was partly covered by a worn cap, and the clothes were nothing like anything she had ever seen him wear. But the body was his, the hands were his, the particular way he held his head, slightly tilted as though always listening for danger. That was her father. Her father, Chief Martins, was sitting outside a roadside buka in Yaba, looking like a man who had not eaten since morning. Her heart did something complicated, something that involved grief and love and old wounds all pressing against each other at once. She could have walked past. Part of her, the wounded part, the part that still had the words, "You are no longer my daughter" on difficult nights, wanted to. But Favor had not survived the last 2 years by listening to the wounded part. She crossed the road. She sat down beside him on the bench. "Papa," she said quietly. Chief Martin's head turned sharply. His eyes, which had been carefully blank since he left his house that morning, went completely still for 1 exposed second. Then he recovered. He looked at her as though he had never seen her before, as though he was simply an old man surprised by a kind stranger. "Good afternoon, my daughter," he said in a voice slightly rougher than his own. Favor looked at him for a long moment. She did not argue with the performance. She did not tear the curtain down. She simply reached into her bag, brought out her wallet, leaned forward to the buka woman and said, "Mama, bring 1 plate of rice and stew, add fish and a cold Fanta." The buka woman disappeared inside. Favor sat back. She said nothing. She scrolled through her phone briefly, then set it down and folded her hands in her lap in that quiet way she had, patient, unhurried, as though she had all the time that the world had been refusing to give her lately. When the food came, she set it in front of the old man. "Eat," she said. "Don't let it get cold." Her voice was not dramatic. It was not performing for anyone. It was the voice of someone who fed people because she understood hunger, not just the hunger of the stomach, but the deeper kind, the hunger of being unseen, of being rejected, of sitting somewhere you don't belong, hoping someone will simply acknowledge that you exist. She knew that hunger. It had lived in her chest for 2 years. Chief Martins picked up the fork. He looked at the plate of rice. And for the first time since he left his house that morning, the old man did not look like he was conducting a quest. He looked like a father who was beginning to understand the cost of what he had thrown away.
He expected tears. He expected her to beg. He had not prepared himself for the truth. They sat together in silence for several minutes. Chief Martins ate slowly, and Favor sat beside him watching the street without watching anything in particular. Around them, Yaba moved in its usual afternoon rhythm. Motorcycles weaving, children in school uniforms dragging their bags, a woman selling groundnuts calling out in Yoruba, A pair of men arguing loudly at a bus stop about football. Nobody looked at them twice. An old man eating, a young woman sitting beside him. Ordinary, invisible. When he had finished eating, Chief Martin set down the fork. He reached up and removed the worn cap from his head. He wiped his face slowly with the back of his hand. He looked at his daughter. "You knew," he said. Favor did not pretend otherwise. "From the moment I saw you," she said. "And you still sat down?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. The street hummed around them. "Your brothers did not sit down." It was not a question. Favor did not answer it. Stanley drove past, and Derek gave me 500 naira and told me never to approach him in public. Something moved across Favor's face. A flash of something, maybe sadness or recognition, but she said nothing. "I wanted to know the truth," Chief Martin said, "about who they are, about who all of you are." Favor turned to look at him then, fully, directly, the way she had always looked at him even as a child when he expected her to look away. "And now you know," she said. "Yes," he exhaled. "Now I know." He reached into the pocket of the torn Ankara shirt and brought out his phone, a small, sharp contradiction against the rest of the costume, and he set it on the table between them. A message thread was open on the screen. Messages he had sent his estate manager during the day, tracking his route, confirming he had made it to Stanley's area, to Derek's, to Yaba. He looked at his daughter. "There is something I need to say to you," he began. "What I did, sending you away, saying you are no longer my papa," her voice was quiet, but it had a firmness in it. "I don't need the apology first. Let me say something." He stopped. "I have built a life. I have a husband who treats me with dignity. I have a daughter who is healthy and loved. I run a business that I started with nothing, and I have 7 regular clients who trust my food and my word. Nobody gave me any of this." She paused. "I am telling you this not to show off. I am telling you because I want you to know that when I sat down beside you today, it was not because I was waiting for you to restore me. I did not sit down because I wanted anything from you." She held his gaze. "I sat down because it was the right thing to do, because you are a human being who needed to eat, because somewhere inside this test you are running, there is a man who is lonely and afraid and wondering if he raised anyone worth knowing. And I did not want that man to sit here hungry." Chief Martins opened his mouth and closed it again. "You said you were no longer my daughter." Her voice was quiet, but her hands tightened slightly in her lap, the only sign of the cost this was taking. "That hurt me in a way I cannot fully describe to you. I cried for weeks. I almost let it destroy me. But I decided that the way you treated me would not become the way I treat the world, and it hasn't." The street continued its noise around them. A child ran past chasing a football. Somewhere a horn blared. Chief Martins felt old in a way that had nothing to do with his age. He felt old in the way of a man confronting a version of himself he does not fully admire. He had built an empire. He had raised 3 children. He had controlled everything within his reach. And here was the one he had thrown away, the one he had declared dead to him, sitting here in dust-covered clothes at a roadside bukan Yaba, being offered bread by the child he had once discarded. He had never felt richer, and he had never felt more ashamed.
When the powerful man finally breaks, it is not always with noise. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it looks like an old man at a roadside table, choosing the only inheritance that actually matters. The drive back to Ekoyi was the longest Chief Martins had made in years. He sat in the back of the taxi. He had left his own car at home deliberately to be fully committed to the disguise and watched Lagos scroll past the window. The bridges, the water, the skyline that he had helped build in small ways with deals and contracts and handshakes over 30 years. He was thinking about two hands. Stanley's hands, gripping a steering wheel and choosing to keep driving. Derek's hands, pressing a 500 naira note into his palm with a warning not to return. And Favor's hands, placing warmth over his without asking for anything in exchange. He arrived home. He changed out of the torn Ankara. He showered for a long time, standing under the hot water with his eyes closed, feeling the dust and the shame wash off. Then he went to his study, sat behind his desk, and began making calls. The first call was to his lawyer. He instructed a revision of his will. The details were quiet, but the weight of them was enormous. The structure of his estate would shift, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as honesty. What he left behind when he died would reflect what he had learned while he still lived. The second call was to Stanley. Stanley answered on the third ring, his voice relaxed, already the Friday call version of himself. "Daddy, good evening." "I saw you today," Chief Martins said, no preamble. "On Ozumba Mbadiwe, you saw me and you drove away." Silence. A long, expensive silence. "Daddy, I wasn't sure it was—" "Don't." The chief's voice was not angry. It was simply certain. The voice of a man who has passed through performance and arrived at truth. "I am not calling to punish you. I am calling to tell you something that I should have said when you were younger. Money is not love, Stanley, and reputation is not character. I built this family on a lie that if I gave you enough, you would be good. I was wrong. That mistake is mine, but the correction is yours." He gave his son time to respond. Stanley said nothing for a long moment. Then, in a voice smaller than his 14,000 followers would have recognized, "I'm sorry, Daddy." The call with Derek was harder. Derek did not offer excuses. He was too calculated for that. But he was also, and this surprised the chief, the first to ask a question that went beneath the surface. "How long have you known that we were like this?" Derek asked. "Long enough," his father said. "And Favor?" "Favor bought me food and sat with me and told me the truth." Another silence. "She was always the bravest one," Derek said. It came out quietly, almost like a confession. "We both knew it, Stanley and I. We just couldn't say it." Chief Martins held that for a moment. "You have time," he said, finally. "Both of you, but not infinite time. And time spent performing is time lost building something real." He ended the call. The third, the last one, and the hardest, was not a call at all. He drove to Yaba this time. He asked Favor's old neighbor, a woman named Mama Clara, who still had his number from years ago and had refused to take sides during the family fracture, for Favor's address. Mama Clara gave it with a look that said, "It's time about." He knocked on the door of a small flat on the second floor of a building on a quiet Yaba street, a building that smelled faintly of cooking, onions and palm oil, and something sweet. Jason opened the door. The two men looked at each other. Jason was younger than Chief Martins had imagined. He had a steady, quiet face, the face of a man who did not need to impress anyone. He was holding a baby in one arm, a little girl with her mother's eyes. "Good evening, sir," Jason said. No hostility, no drama. "Good evening," Chief Martins said. And then, because the day had already taken everything else from him, he said,
I came to meet my granddaughter. Jason opened the door wider. Favor appeared behind her husband. She looked at her father standing in her doorway, in his own clothes now, his own face, no disguise, just an old man carrying the weight of what he had learned. She did not cry. She did not run to him. She stepped back and said, "Come in, Papa. I'll make tea." That was all. No grand ceremony, no cameras, no audience. Just a father stepping across the threshold of a life he had once rejected into the warmth of a home built without him, learning too late, but not too late, that the most important inheritance a man leaves his children is not money or land or property. It is the example of who he chose to be. Enter. Months later, when people asked Chief Martins what had changed him, he would tell them something simple. He would say, "I had everything, and then I put it all down for one day and walked into the street with nothing, and I found out which of my children had something money cannot buy." He would not say their names, he would not explain the test, but those who paid attention would notice that he spoke about his daughter differently now, not with a grudging acknowledgement of a man who has no choice, but with the particular pride of someone who knows they received grace they did not earn. And sometimes, when he held his granddaughter Grace in his arms, that small girl with her mother's eyes and her father's calm, he would feel something settle in his chest that all his wealth had never purchased. Peace. The real kind. The kind you cannot inherit. The kind you have to earn, one honest moment at a time. If this story touched something in you, subscribe now, because every week we bring you stories like this. Don't miss the next one.